The morning of Pope Francis's funeral began with a quiet sadness that seemed to rest over the whole of Vatican City. The sun had not yet reached its full height, and a soft pale light stretched across St. Peter's Square. People moved gently, speaking in low tones, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the moment. Thousands had come from around the world, filling the square long before the ceremony began. Many held small photos of the Pope. Others carried rosaries or flowers. Some simply stood with their hands folded, their eyes full of memories. In the middle of this sea of people stood the Swiss Guard, forming a line of colorful uniforms and unwavering discipline. Their bright attire, with its deep blues, reds, and yellows, stood out sharply against the calm stone of the basilica. They held their long pikes with both hands, standing perfectly still as they had been trained to do since their first day. Each guard looked straight ahead, their faces calm and unreadable. Their duty today was heavier than usual. They were not just protecting the Vatican. They were honoring a man who had changed lives across the world. Among these guards was Corporal Elias Meyer. He had been part of the Swiss Guard for several years, and he had carried out his duties with great care. People who worked with him often said Elias had a quiet strength. He followed every rule with precision, never arriving late, never making mistakes during drills, and never letting emotion show on his face during public events. But today, something inside him felt different. Elias stood in line like the others, his posture straight and his hands firm on his weapon. Yet his mind was filled with a mix of memories and emotions he had tried to keep hidden. His connection to Pope Francis was more personal than most people knew. The Pope had once spoken to him in a moment that had changed the course of his life. It had been a conversation unlike any he expected to have, one that stayed with him through every shift and every night spent guarding the quiet hallways of the Vatican. As the warm morning slowly brightened, Elias could feel the atmosphere shifting. The crowd grew silent, almost as if the entire square was holding its breath. The slow tolling of bells echoed through the air, each sound deep and steady. It marked the beginning of the ceremony, and with each ring, the emotion in the square grew heavier. Elias felt it too. Even while he kept his eyes forward, he sensed the sadness carried by every person around him, from the high-ranking cardinals in their robes to the families who had traveled across countries just to say goodbye. He felt it in his own chest as well, though he tried to focus on his training. A Swiss guard was taught to stand still, to remain calm no matter what was happening. His job was to be a symbol of strength, not a man with feelings written all over his face. But inside, Elias felt a quiet pressure building. It was not the panic of someone unprepared. It was the emotional weight of someone who cared deeply and was trying hard not to show it. When the procession began, the movement was slow and careful. A group of clergy walked ahead carrying incense burners that released soft trails of scented smoke. Behind them, other officials followed in strict formation, each step perfectly timed, the air filled with gentle music from the choir, their voices rising softly into the sky. People in the crowd wiped their eyes, bowed their heads, or reached for the hand of someone standing beside them. As the casket approached the open space near the front, the Swiss Guard remained absolutely still. Their job at this moment was to hold formation, no matter what they felt. Elias told himself to breathe slowly and focus. He had rehearsed this stance more times than he could count. Yet today, every second felt heavier than the last. His eyes stayed forward, but in his mind, he replayed the conversation he had once shared with Pope Francis. It had happened years earlier, during a quiet evening when Elias had been assigned to guard a hallway near the Pope's residence. Even though he was trained never to speak unless spoken to, the Pope had approached him with a warm smile. "Thank you for your service," the Pope had said in his gentle voice. Elias had nodded, unsure of how to respond. He was used to giving simple replies, nothing more. But Pope Francis continued, noticing something in the young guard's expression. He asked where Elias was from, what made him join the guard, and whether he missed his home. Elias remembered feeling surprised that someone so important took the time to ask him such personal questions. Eventually, their conversation turned to something deeper. The Pope had told him, "Never forget the value of a sincere heart. Rules guide us, but the heart gives meaning to our choices. If a moment ever asks for honesty, follow it with courage." Those words had stayed with Elias long after the conversation ended. Even now, in the middle of the funeral, they echoed softly in his memory. He had never repeated them to anyone. They felt too personal, like a gift he needed to keep safe. As the ceremony continued, Elias felt that same sincerity rising in him again. The choir's soft harmonies blended with the hushed prayers of the crowd. Every sound in the square seemed to grow more emotional as the reality of the moment sank in. They were saying farewell to a man who had touched millions. Elias sensed his throat tighten. He tried to push the feeling down, adjusting his breath in a way that would keep his chest from showing even the slightest movement. But he knew he was not the only guard struggling. Even though they stood still, he could sense the emotional energy around him. The cameras positioned throughout the square captured every detail. Journalists stood quietly to the side, reporting with soft voices. They showed the faces of people who had come from many cultures, all united by their respect for Francis. Elias heard a small child somewhere in the crowd ask, "Is he with God now?" followed by a parent's comforting whisper. The sound made him close his eyes just briefly, though he quickly forced them open again. His training did not allow for distractions, but moments like this were impossible to ignore. The smell of incense grew stronger as the casket reached the very center of the formation. The sunlight hit it in a gentle glow, making the moment feel even more surreal. Elias felt a wave of memories return. Moments when he had seen the Pope walking through the gardens, moments when he had watched him greet people with warmth and kindness, moments when he had seen the Pope spend longer than necessary speaking with someone who simply needed to be heard. Those memories made Elias's chest feel tight again. He knew he had to stay calm. He told himself that he was here to serve, not to show emotion. But deep inside, he felt something shifting. In that moment, the entire world seemed to slow down. The choir's voices softened. The crowd's murmurs faded. Even the sunlight felt still. Elias realized that this was not just another duty. This was a farewell to a man who had touched his life in a way no one else knew. And though he stood perfectly still on the outside, something inside him whispered that today might not pass like all the others. Something in his heart felt ready to step forward, even if his body had not yet moved. The moment was approaching, slowly and silently, and Elias could feel it with each breath he took. He did not yet know what he would do. He only knew that the emotions he had tried to hide were growing stronger, preparing him for something he had never felt during any ceremony before. The world around him continued in a calm, steady rhythm, but for Elias, something important was awakening, a mix of gratitude, memory, and quiet courage that would soon shape a moment the Vatican would never forget. The ceremony in St. Peter's Square was reaching its most emotional point. The choir's gentle music blended with the soft breeze that moved through the open space. The scent of incense lingered in the air, making the atmosphere feel almost dreamlike. People in the crowd watched with full attention as the procession reached the center. Many held their breath, knowing this moment would stay in their memories for years. Elias Meyer stood in his formation, his back straight, his hands steady on his long ceremonial weapon. On the outside, he looked like every other guard, still, respectful, and perfectly disciplined. But inside, something was building. He could feel it in his chest, a quiet pressure that grew stronger with each passing second. He told himself again and again that he must remain still. A Swiss guard is trained for stillness. A Swiss guard is trained to keep emotion hidden. Their uniforms may be bright, but their expressions are meant to remain calm and unreadable. It was a duty that Elias had always followed without question, yet today everything felt different. As the casket was placed in its position, the sunlight fell on it softly, giving it a warm, glowing look. The choir's voices rose slightly, filling the square with a peaceful sound. People wiped their eyes or bowed their heads, feeling the weight of the moment. Elias watched the scene through the corner of his eye, careful not to move his head. He knew how important this moment was, not just for the world, but for him personally. Pope Francis had touched his life in a way he could never explain to anyone. The private conversation they once shared came back to him again, word for word. If a moment ever asks for honesty, follow it with courage. Those words echoed louder now, as if spoken directly beside him. The ceremony continued with slow, respectful movements. Several clergy members stepped forward to offer prayers. Others carried symbolic items that represented the Pope's life of service. Everything was done with such care that not a single gesture felt rushed. But while the ceremony followed tradition, Elias felt something inside him break away from that same tradition. His breath grew slightly uneven. He tried to calm himself, taking slow, quiet breaths, as he had been trained to do, but the emotion within him refused to settle. He could feel his heart beating a little faster, not in fear, but in deep emotion. His thoughts drifted again to that evening years ago when Pope Francis had spoken to him with such kindness. Elias remembered how surprised he felt that someone so important noticed him. He remembered how the Pope's eyes had softened with understanding, as if he saw beyond the uniform and straight posture. Most of all, Elias remembered the warmth of the Pope's message, the reminder that rules had meaning, but so did compassion. The choir shifted to another hymn. Its melody was soft and gentle, almost comforting. The crowd's quiet sighs and soft murmurs blended with the music. At that moment, the entire square seemed united in one shared feeling: gratitude. Elias felt that gratitude too, deep, strong, and impossible to ignore. He stood as still as he could, but his mind was moving quickly. His thoughts raced from memory to memory, from duty to emotion. He felt as if two parts of himself were quietly arguing, one reminding him of protocol, the other reminding him of the Pope's sincere words. He wanted to honor the Pope, not just as a guard, but as a person who had received kindness when he needed it most. Elias felt that the Pope had seen something in him that he had not seen in himself, and now, as he stood there, the idea of remaining completely still felt too distant from the gratitude he carried in his heart. The moment that would change everything began with something small. At first, it was just a tiny shift in Elias's fingers, something so slight that no one noticed. Then his breath caught slightly. The pressure in his chest became too much, and he felt an overwhelming need to express what he felt. His heart whispered that this was the moment Pope Francis had spoken about, the moment that asked for honesty, not perfect form. Before he could stop himself, Elias felt his foot move, just one small step forward. It was gentle, slow, and filled with emotion, but it was unmistakably a break in protocol. Swiss guards were meant to remain frozen in place, no matter what happened in front of them. The crowd noticed immediately. A soft wave of whispered surprise spread through the onlookers closest to the front. Their eyes widened slightly. Cameras that had been focused on the casket shifted without hesitation, turning toward the young guard who had taken the unexpected step. Every Swiss guard around Elias sensed the break instantly. Their training sharpened their awareness of any movement within the formation. Though they did not turn their heads, he felt their discipline tighten, as if each of them tensed silently, waiting to see what would happen next. Elias could feel the sudden attention. A warmth spread across his face, though he kept his expression steady. He did not take another step, but the moment was already unforgettable. His single movement had felt natural, almost guided by the heart rather than the mind. His hand rose slightly afterward, not in a salute, not in a dramatic gesture, but in a small, heartfelt sign of farewell. It was a movement so personal, so gentle, that cameras captured it instantly. The step and the small gesture lasted only a moment, but for everyone watching, it felt like time had slowed. The choir's voices continued, but even their sound seemed softer now. People in the crowd watched Elias with wide eyes, unsure whether they had just witnessed a mistake or something meaningful. The clergy near the front paused briefly, sensing the sudden shift in the emotional atmosphere. Even the sunlight seemed to catch differently on Elias's uniform at that moment, making him stand out more than he ever had during any ceremony. Inside, Elias felt a strange calm after the gesture. The pressure in his chest faded, replaced by a gentle warmth. He had not planned to do it. It had simply come from a place deep within him, a place that remembered kindness, sincerity, and the Pope's words about courage. For a few seconds, it felt like he and the entire square were connected by one honest moment. A moment that did not fit inside old rules, but felt true. Cameras took rapid photos. News crews whispered into microphones. People in the crowd leaned forward, trying to understand what the young guard had done and why. But Elias did not move again. He straightened his posture and returned to stillness, his breathing calm once more. The ceremony resumed fully, but something in the air had changed. People felt it without needing an explanation. They sensed that something heartfelt had just taken place, something not planned, not rehearsed, and not part of protocol. Elias remained silent, but inside he understood what he had done. He knew he had broken a rule, but he also knew he had acted with sincerity, guided by the memory of a man who had taught him the meaning of courage from the heart. The world around him continued normally, but the moment he created would soon travel far beyond the square. It would be replayed, discussed, and interpreted by people everywhere. And though he stood still once again, Elias felt something settle quietly within him, a peaceful certainty that he had honored Pope Francis in the most honest way he could. The moment Elias Meyer stepped forward and lifted his hand in that soft farewell gesture, the atmosphere in St. Peter's Square shifted in a way no one could have predicted. At first, the change felt small, like a light breeze moving through a quiet field. But within seconds, the reaction grew, spreading through the crowd, through the cameras, through the reporters, and then far beyond the Vatican walls. People nearest to the Swiss Guard line had seen the gesture clearly. Their eyes widened, and their hands slowly lifted to their mouths. They whispered to each other, wondering if they had truly witnessed a Swiss Guard break protocol during one of the most solemn events in modern Vatican history. A few even glanced at other guards to see if anyone else was reacting, but every other guard remained still, as if carved from stone. Only Elias had moved. The cameras, always searching for meaningful moments, immediately focused on him. Hundreds of lenses clicked at once. Some caught the gentle rise of his hand, others caught the small yet clear step he had taken, and still others captured the emotion hidden behind his steady eyes. Even though his expression did not break, the depth of what he felt was visible to those watching closely enough. Reporters, standing at the edges of the square with notebooks and microphones, began whispering into their devices. Some wondered aloud whether the gesture was allowed. Others quietly debated whether it was intentional or a mistake. But everyone agreed on one thing: it had been powerful. Inside the square, among the thousands of people, emotions began to rise like a slow wave. Some visitors from other countries saw the moment on the large screens set up around the area. At first, they were confused. A Swiss Guard had never broken formation like this before. People pointed at the screen, then toward the actual line of guards, trying to confirm that what they saw was real. One elderly woman clasped her hands together and whispered, "That was beautiful." A young man beside her nodded, though he was unsure if it was allowed. Even children sensed that something important had happened. A girl tugged on her father's sleeve and asked softly, "Did he love the Pope?" The father smiled gently and replied, "Maybe he cared very much." Elias, however, was unaware of the impact spreading through the crowd. After making the gesture, he returned to complete stillness. His posture was perfect again, and his gaze returned to its fixed point ahead. Yet inside he felt a soft warmth settle over his thoughts, a mixture of relief and quiet emotion. The gesture had come from his heart, and even though he had broken protocol, he did not regret it. But the Vatican officials standing at the front had noticed. A few exchanged surprised glances. They did not want to interrupt the ceremony, so they kept their positions, but their minds were already processing what this moment meant. They wondered whether discipline action would be needed. They also wondered why Elias, a guard known for his precise discipline, had stepped forward during such an important event. Above them, in the press box, journalists began preparing quick notes for breaking news updates. A reporter from Italy spoke into his microphone in a low tone. "A Swiss guard has just taken an unexpected step forward, offering what appears to be a personal gesture of respect." Another reporter from South America whispered excitedly, "This moment will be shared around the world. It reflects the emotional connection people had with Pope Francis." Social media posts began forming almost instantly. People posted photos and short video clips captured on their phones. Captions like, "A guard's heartfelt farewell," or "A moment of humanity at the Vatican," began to spread. Within minutes, the clip of Elias's gesture was already being shared online by thousands of people. As the ceremony continued, the emotional reaction grew stronger. People found themselves moved not only by the funeral itself, but by this single human gesture that felt so sincere. Many felt it represented the kindness and warmth Pope Francis had shown throughout his life. Some believed it was a perfect reminder of the Pope's teaching that true respect comes from the heart, not only from tradition. A quiet ripple of conversation spread through the crowd as the prayers went on. People wondered who the guard was. They wondered why he had felt the need to break protocol. They wondered what story lay behind the gesture. They did not know his name or the private memory he carried, but they felt the sincerity so clearly that it hardly mattered. Inside the Swiss Guard formation, the tension was rising. Not because anyone was upset, but because every guard knew what this meant. Breaking protocol was extremely rare, and it had happened during a moment when cameras from all over the world were watching. Elias's fellow guards continued standing still, but they were aware of every whisper. Every camera pointed at them, and every ripple of emotion moving through the crowd. Some guards silently admired Elias's courage. Others worried what consequences might follow, but none of them looked at him or reacted outwardly. Their training kept them focused on maintaining perfect discipline. Elias himself felt the weight of what had just happened. His heart had settled, but his mind was slowly waking up to the reality of the moment. He knew that when the ceremony ended, there would be questions. He knew he might face punishment. He knew he had stepped into a moment larger than himself, but he also felt something else, a quiet sense of peace. He had honored Pope Francis in a way that felt true to the memory he carried. And deep down, he believed that the Pope would not have disapproved. In fact, Elias felt certain that Francis would have understood completely. Meanwhile, Vatican officials inside the Apostolic Palace received messages from staff watching the ceremony. Some were stunned, others were curious. A few believed this moment would be remembered for years. One senior official whispered to another, "This might change the way people see the Swiss Guard forever." The funeral ceremony moved forward, but the energy of the moment lingered. When the choir sang its next hymn, the sound carried a deeper emotion, as if it had woven itself into the heartfelt gesture they had all witnessed. People listened with full attention, their hearts full. As the final blessing approached, the cameras kept returning to Elias. Not because he moved again, he didn't, but because people could not stop thinking about what he had done earlier. His stillness now only made the moment he had broken protocol feel even more significant. Across the world, televisions broadcast the footage. People in different countries sat up a little straighter when they saw the guard's gentle step. Some felt goosebumps, others felt tears form. Many were touched by how simple yet meaningful the gesture was. Commentators began discussing it. News anchors commented on how rare it was to see such human emotion from a member of the Swiss Guard. They spoke about how Pope Francis always encouraged kindness and sincerity. They wondered if this moment reflected the personal influence Francis had on even the most disciplined of men. Back in the square, the ceremony came to its peaceful close. People slowly began to leave, though many took one last look at the Swiss Guard formation. Some searched for Elias's face among the line of guards, hoping to catch another glimpse of the man who had created the unforgettable moment. But Elias remained silent and still, blending back into the formation, even while the world continued to whisper about him. By the time the crowds had left St. Peter's Square, the moment had already become a topic of discussion across the Vatican. Members of the clergy talked quietly among themselves. Some believed it was a beautiful and sincere act. Others believed it had broken important rules. But no one could deny that it had moved people deeply. Elias did not yet know what his future held. He did not know whether he would be praised or questioned. But as he stood silently in the fading sunlight, he felt a calm he could not explain. His gesture had come from a place of truth, and he felt grateful that he had listened to that part of himself. What he did not know was that this moment would soon reach the highest levels of Vatican leadership, and that the reaction would surprise him in ways he could not imagine. After the funeral ceremony ended and the crowd slowly began leaving St. Peter's Square, the Vatican felt quieter than usual. The bells had stopped ringing, the choir had fallen silent, and the soft incense smoke drifted away in the evening air. But even though everything outside looked calm, a different kind of energy was growing inside the Vatican walls, an energy filled with curiosity, surprise, and quiet discussion. Inside offices, hallways, and meeting rooms, people were talking about one thing: the moment a young Swiss guard stepped out of formation and made a gentle farewell gesture during the funeral of Pope Francis. The simple act had spread across the world in minutes, and now everyone wanted to know why he had done it. Some clergy members whispered about tradition, others whispered about emotion, but many privately agreed that there was something special in the moment, something sincere, something deeply human. While all these conversations were happening, Elias Meyer had been sent back to the guards' quarters after the ceremony. He walked quietly, keeping his posture steady even though his mind was full of thoughts. He wondered what would happen next. He wondered whether he would be called in immediately for questioning, but most of all, he wondered whether he had disappointed anyone. When he entered the guardhouse, the other Swiss guards looked at him in a way they never had before. Their eyes carried a mix of curiosity, respect, and concern. Even though guards rarely spoke about emotional matters, today was not like any ordinary day. A fellow guard approached him quietly and whispered, "Are you okay?" Elias nodded. "Yes," he said softly. The guard gave him a careful look, then placed a reassuring hand on his arm before walking away. No one else asked him anything, but several guards gave him small, understanding nods, something subtle but meaningful. Elias sat on his bed and took a slow breath. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of distant voices in the hallway. He knew a conversation with senior officials was coming, but he didn't know when or how. All he could do was wait. Meanwhile, In another part of the Vatican, a group of senior officials gathered in a large room. They watched the video of Elias's gesture again and again, playing it in slow motion, studying every detail, from the step he took to the small, heartfelt raise of his hand. The room was filled with thoughtful silence. One official finally spoke. "It was sincere," he said softly. "Not careless. Sincere." Another nodded. "Yes, and it has touched many people. Look at the reaction outside." A third official, older and known for his love of tradition, added, "The gesture broke protocol, but the world is responding with understanding. Perhaps this moment reflects the kind of heart Pope Francis encouraged in all of us." Their discussion continued, calm and thoughtful. Some believed the guard should be gently reminded about protocol. Others believed the moment should be left alone as a natural expression of love and respect. The final decision, however, was not theirs to make alone. News of the moment had reached someone else, someone whose reaction mattered greatly. A close aide to Pope Francis had been informed about the guard's action. When he saw the footage, his eyes softened immediately. He recognized Elias. He remembered how the Pope had once spoken highly of the young guard, mentioning him in a private conversation years earlier. The aide felt a lump in his throat as he watched the video again. It reminded him of the Pope's gentle belief in kindness. It reminded him of Francis's teachings about sincerity and compassion. It reminded him of the Pope's ability to connect with people on a deep, personal level. He sat down at his desk and opened a well-kept journal where he had written down many of the Pope's private thoughts and conversations over the years. After a moment of searching, he found the entry he was looking for, a note Pope Francis had once said about Elias. The aide read the words slowly, almost carefully. "That young guard has a sincere heart. If he ever expresses that sincerity, do not silence it, honor it." The aide closed the journal softly, his eyes filled with emotion. The Pope had spoken those words long before his passing, never imagining they would become so important one day. But now, they felt like a quiet message sent directly from the heart of the man they had all loved so deeply. Later that evening, the aide asked to meet with a small group of Vatican officials. When they gathered, he shared the journal entry with them. The room grew silent as they read the Pope's words. No one spoke for several long moments. They simply sat there, absorbing the meaning. Finally, one official said gently, "Then we know what must be done." Another nodded. "We must honor the Pope's guidance. The gesture came from sincerity, not rebellion." And with that, they decided to call Elias in, not to punish him, not to question him harshly, but to understand him. A message was sent to the guardhouse asking for Elias to come to the meeting room. When he received the notice, his heart tightened with nervousness. He stood, straightened his uniform, and walked through the long corridors. Each step felt heavy, but he kept moving with determination, reminding himself that he had acted from the heart. When he entered the room, the officials stood waiting, their expressions calm and gentle. Elias saluted formally, then lowered his hands, bracing for whatever they would say. To his surprise, no one looked upset. One official spoke kindly. "Corporal Meyer, thank you for coming." Elias nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Another official stepped forward. "We saw what happened today. The world saw it too. Before we say anything, we want to hear from you. What led you to take that step?" Elias hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the memory was personal. But after a moment, he spoke with quiet honesty. "I remembered something Pope Francis once told me," Elias said softly. "He said to follow the heart when the moment asks for sincerity. Today felt like that moment." The room remained silent, not in judgment, but in understanding. The officials exchanged gentle glances. Then the aide stepped forward, holding the journal. "Corporal, he said, his voice softer than Elias expected. "The Pope spoke of you once. He said he saw sincerity in you. He said that if you ever acted from that sincerity, we should not silence you." Elias felt his breath catch. His eyes softened with emotion he tried to hide. The aide continued, "Your gesture today was not a mistake. It was a reflection of the kindness Pope Francis believed in. You honored him." Elias stared at the floor for a moment, overwhelmed. He never expected such a response. He had prepared himself for correction, even discipline. But instead, he received understanding, something he did not think possible. A senior official stepped closer. "Your action touched many people. It showed the world the kind of relationship Pope Francis formed, even with those who served quietly in the background." Another added gently, "Your sincerity brought comfort to many. It reminded everyone of the humanity that lives within these walls." Elias finally looked up, his eyes clear but emotional. "Thank you," he whispered. "You do not need to worry," the aide said warmly. "We are grateful for the sincerity you expressed today. It was a moment that honored Pope Francis in a way words could not." Elias felt a peaceful warmth fill his chest. The nervousness faded. The uncertainty faded. All that remained was gratitude. He saluted again, but this time with a heart much lighter than before. As he left the room, he felt as if a quiet blessing had been placed over him, a gentle approval that echoed the kindness Pope Francis had shown him years earlier. What he did not yet know was that this meeting would lead to something even greater, something that would soon reshape the way the Swiss Guard approached moments of deep emotion. In the days following the funeral, the Vatican slowly returned to its calm rhythm, but something felt different in the air. People were still talking about the moment when a Swiss Guard had stepped forward during the ceremony. The gesture had been replayed on news channels, shared across social media, and discussed in homes, churches, and community gatherings around the world. Some called it the step heard around the world. Others called it the farewell that touched millions. Many simply said it was a human moment. Inside the Vatican, Elias Meyer tried to continue with his daily duties, though everything felt slightly changed. Whenever he walked through the halls, people, cardinals, staff members, nuns, and even visitors, looked at him with gentle eyes. They did not interrupt him, since the Swiss Guard were always respected in their work, but the small smiles they gave him said everything. He could feel it. They weren't looking at him as a guard who had disobeyed orders. They were looking at him as someone who had expressed something real, something everyone else had felt but could not show. Elias did not seek attention. In fact, the soft waves of recognition made him shy. He preferred to keep his head down and focus on his duties, but he carried the warmth of the moment inside him like a small flame. It burned quietly but brightly, reminding him of why he had acted from the heart. One afternoon, Elias was assigned to stand guard near one of the Vatican gardens, a peaceful area filled with tall trees, chirping birds, and gentle fountains. It was the same garden where he had once seen Pope Francis taking slow walks, greeting gardeners, and smiling at anyone who crossed his path. As he stood there, he could almost imagine the Pope walking past him again, offering that familiar gentle nod of acknowledgement. The memory made Elias's eyes soften. He stood straight, but inside his thoughts were warm and calm. A senior member of the Swiss Guard approached him after a while. His footsteps were quiet against the stone path. When he reached Elias, he paused, offering a respectful nod. "Corporal Meyer," he said in a steady voice, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Elias nodded. "Of course, sir." The senior guard motioned for him to walk with him for a few steps, still remaining within view of the assigned area. Their walk was slow and peaceful. "I want to tell you something important," the senior guard began. His voice was kind, not stern. The leadership held a meeting yesterday. Your gesture during the funeral was discussed at length. Elias braced himself, unsure whether this conversation would change everything again, but the senior guard gave him a gentle smile. They have decided, he continued, that your action was one of sincere respect. Because of this, new guidance will be added to our training. Elias blinked, unsure he heard correctly. New guidance, sir? Yes, the senior guard said. A line is being added to our training principles. It explains that in moments of exceptional emotional importance, moments that carry deep meaning, a guard may show a small gesture of reverence if it comes from the heart, and if the moment truly calls for it. Elias felt a soft shock move through him. They changed the rule because of what happened. They didn't change everything, the senior guard said kindly, but they opened a small door, a compassionate one. Your sincerity reminded them that we are not just uniforms. We are people, and sometimes a person needs to express what is in their heart. Elias needed a moment to take this in. He had never imagined that his single step would ripple all the way into the traditions of the Swiss Guard, an institution hundreds of years old. But it had, not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in a gentle, meaningful way, just like the Pope had lived his life. The senior guard placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. You honored the Pope in a way that many of us will never forget. Be proud, but stay humble. Your sincerity has become part of our story now. Elias felt his chest warm with emotion. He nodded slowly. Thank you, sir. When the senior guard walked away, Elias turned his eyes toward the garden. The sunlight filtered softly through the leaves, creating little patterns on the ground. A few birds chirped from a branch overhead. Everything felt peaceful, as if the world itself understood what had just been said. That evening, when Elias returned to the barracks, several guards greeted him with quiet smiles. One younger guard approached him shyly. Corporal, he said softly, I just want to say, what you did made many of us proud. Elias looked at him with gentle surprise. Thank you. The young guard nodded, then added, You showed that even in perfect discipline, the heart still matters. Elias did not respond right away. He felt the words settle inside him like a soft truth. Yes, discipline mattered. Tradition mattered. But the heart mattered too. Maybe even more. Over the next several days, the world continued to talk about the moment. News articles described Elias as the guard who showed humanity. People sent letters to the Vatican thanking the young guard for expressing what they had felt. Some letters were from strangers, some from families, some from people who had admired Pope Francis for years. A few letters were even addressed specifically to Elias, though he never expected such attention. One letter came from a woman in South America who wrote that his simple step helped her feel comfort during her sadness. Another letter came from a young student who said he wanted to grow up to be brave in quiet ways, just like Elias. Elias read these letters slowly, almost in disbelief. He had never imagined that a small gesture could touch so many lives. One afternoon, as he walked through a quiet hallway, he passed by the aide who had once shared the Pope's journal entry with the officials. The aide stopped him gently. Corporal Meyer, he said with a warm smile, I want to show you something. He handed Elias a small piece of paper, a copy of the same journal entry where Pope Francis had spoken about him. Elias read it again, his eyes softening. That young guard has a sincere heart. If he ever expresses that sincerity, do not silence it. Honor it. Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion. He closed the paper carefully. He saw something in you, the aide said quietly. And today, the world has seen it too. Elias thanked him with a quiet voice, then continued his walk, feeling more grounded than ever. Months later, on an early morning when the sky was slowly turning pink, Elias stood at his post near the basilica. The square was empty, quiet, peaceful. He stood with perfect posture, his hands resting on his ceremonial weapon, his eyes calm and focused. But deep inside him was something new, a steady understanding of his place in the world. He was still a Swiss guard. He was still a protector of the Vatican. He still followed the rules and honored the traditions. But he also carried something else now, the knowledge that a single sincere act could touch the hearts of millions. And that sincerity, when guided by kindness, could shape even the oldest traditions. Visitors would later walk past him, unaware that this calm, steady guard had once taken a step that moved the entire world. They would not know the story behind his gentle eyes. But Elias did not need that recognition. He carried the memory quietly and humbly, grateful for the moment he had shared with the Pope, grateful for the warmth that had grown from it, and grateful for the way the world had understood his heart. His one step had become a symbol, a reminder that even in places built on centuries of tradition, there is always room for humanity. And as the sun rose over the Vatican roof, casting soft golden light across the square, Elias took another steady breath, feeling at peace. The world had changed a little, and so had he.